Hey guys, I'm Tyler and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to build this live edge maple slab dining table with metal legs. The metal legs we'll cover in another video. Today we're just going to go over making the slab, taking it from a tree to this tabletop. This project actually began back in February of 2016 when I was picking up some other hardwood at my buddy Brent's house, and I saw him milling up this maple log, and I immediately had a vision for our farmhouse table sitting on that wood miser mill. A year later, when it was finally dry, I got it home and used a 2x2 piece of square metal stock to find the flattest portions of the wood and trimmed off either end where there was some cracking from the drying process. We wanted to incorporate the live edge of these beautiful maple slabs on either side of our farmhouse table, so I needed to square up and flatten one side while leaving the live edge on the other. So I used a piece of 3/4 inch plywood and screwed it to the bottom of my maple slab so that I could run that straight edge against the fence of my table saw. You might be wondering why it looks like I'm cutting these slabs in half, and I am. The reason for that is I only have a 13-inch wide planer, and I wanted to be able to use that machine to flatten these slabs. I had 3 of these slabs total. 2 of them were left with the live edge cut down to just under 13 inches, including the live edge, and the 3rd slab was cut down to 13 inches square on both sides. Now you guys probably know that a planer only works if you have a square side to begin with, so I used my assembly table, which is nice and flat, extended it with my Rockler T-track table, made sure everything was plumb to one another, and then laid down my slabs, used some shims to make sure they didn't rock at all, and then grabbed that 2x2 square tubing and laid it on either side to give me a nice flat reference surface for a router sled. And in the router sled, I will be using my rigid 2 horsepower router with a 1.5 inch router flattening bit. I will leave a link to that in the description below if any of you guys are interested. I did practice this technique on a much smaller project, my wood and resin lamp. Link to that as well if you guys would be interested in watching that. This is a debacle of a messy project, but it must be done. And hey, if you guys aren't subscribed already, why don't you hit that subscribe button right to the bottom right of the video and hit that bell so you never miss when we upload a new one. And once we had that flat reference surface from the router sled, it was time to move on to the planer. And let me tell you, this was a lot of planing to get these things all even and nice and flat. But there is nothing better in woodworking than running something through a planer and revealing the beautiful grain that you found underneath that dirty surface. Being that these slabs are all 13 inches wide, that was the full physical capacity of the planer, and it certainly pushed it to its limits. Sharp blades do help, as does having your brother come over to help you manage those long, heavy slabs. After much planing, all the boards were even and nice and flat. It was time to move on to the jointer. And yes, this is probably more than the capacity that my jointer can handle, but we actually had the infeed table of the planer on the infeed side of the jointer to help balance everything. And then along with my brother catching everything on the outfeed, we were able to get a nice square joint on my small 6-inch jointer. Once all the jointing and planing was complete, I laid out the boards in the orientation that I wanted on my assembly table and marked out where I was going to use my homemade portable mortiser to put in some mortises. I get quite a few questions about this DIY tool that I have made. It is not my design, linked to the original design in the description below, and the tool works quite well. It does help to make sure that you have the tool on a flat surface, as it will help keep your mortise nice and straight. Takes away from the portability aspect of everything, but it does help make sure everything is nice and even. When I was done cutting the mortises, I made sure I vacuumed everything out, and it was time to put in the loose tenons using some wood glue, making sure I had a nice even application. You have probably noticed at this point that I am gluing up this tabletop in 2 different sections simply because it is too big to handle at one time, and I also didn't have enough clamps that were wide enough to do a 1 glue up assembly. Once I had that first panel in the clamps, I used a level to make sure everything was even and I didn't have any bowing, and then moved on to the second slab. And when the 2 assemblies had been given a few days to dry, it was time to put everything together and see our beautiful maple slab. Again, with the help of my brother, we used my widest bestie clamps and set everything in place, added our dominoes and a liberal amount of glue, and then glued it up. And yes, it was slightly stressful, but it does help to make sure that you have everything in place within easy reach before starting up such a large glue up. 100%. We did use a few cauls with this large glue up, 2 small ones on the side and 1 heavy duty one in the middle. And because I only had 2 of the large bestie clamps, we used some strap clamps with a protective board underneath the ratchet strap. It took some careful persuasion, but perfectly flat. Since I had to deal with the live edge, it took me a little bit of thinking to figure out how I was going to square up the edges. So I laid out the slab on the assembly table, took a step back and eyed down the side of the slab to what looked straight, and then referenced off the side of my square assembly table to mark out the edges that I wanted on the first cut, and then measured down to the opposite side for the opposite cut. There were a few voids and knots in the top of the maple slabs, and I used some untinted 2-part epoxy to fill those voids. After the epoxy had been given ample time to cure, it was time to sand. I used a chisel to clean out the glue squeeze out, and then 1 heavy pass with 60 grit sandpaper, and then marked some lines with the pencil technique so that I could tell where I was sanding. Worked my way up to 180 grit with the random orbit sander, making sure that I took the time to hit those live edge sides. I'm going to be using General Finish's Armor Seal in a semi-gloss to finish this table. I finished both sides of the table with 2 coats on the bottom and 3 coats on the top of the maple slab. We let the finish cure for 7 days before bringing the tabletop inside for light use until 30 days have passed, which is the full cure time for Armor Seal. And the big moment of finally bringing the table inside. With the help of my brother, we laid it top down on the floor so that we could attach the homemade legs. I will show these legs in a future video. They are assembled out of metal, but you can absolutely assemble them out of wood if you would like. We oriented them in the proper position on our table and then set up the hardware. There is hardware to go through the 2x4 inch tubing, and then there's also hardware to go through just 1/4 inch stock for the angled supports. I made sure to take some careful measurements and mark my drill bit with tape so that I would not drill through the top of the table. To reach through the tubing of the leg assembly, I took the lead out of a long nose pencil so that I could mark onto the tabletop itself. After everything was tightened down with a socket wrench, we were finally ready to flip the table over. And once this table was upright, it is not going anywhere. I'll bet you this table weighs between 3 and 350 pounds, and it is solid. And again, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button so that you will be here when I release the leg assembly video. We are super excited to finally have this table in our house, and we have been loving having our family dinners around it. Well, that is a wrap on the Live Edge Maple Farmhouse tabletop. I hope you guys enjoyed this build. If you did, please hammer that thumbs up button. We are super happy to finally have this in our kitchen as our eating area. Our old table was in dire need of replacement. Maple may not be the best idea for a tabletop, especially with kids that are going to be beaten up on the top of this table, but the top can easily be replaced. The legs will last us a lifetime, and I will show you guys how I built those in an upcoming video. I'm DIY Tyler, and you guys have a good one.